It's October. It's spooky season, and I know many of you who listen to the show celebrate spooky season all year round, just like me. But what if you were a victim of a violent crime, and people tried to use your love of the macabre and the strange to justify your own murder?
What you are about to hear is believed to be real, based on witness accounts, testimonies, and public record. This is terrifying and true.
This time on Terrifying and True, we have a piece requested by one of you listeners. I received an email from Crystal Holder suggesting I look into Chattooga County, Georgia, because back in the 1980s at a place called Corpsewood Manor, something terrible happened. Our team here at Terrifying and True was very excited to look into this obscure case, and we're about to bring it to you right now. Because the Corpsewood Manor was built by an ex-professor and his husband in Georgia. Their lives were filled with sex, Satanism, LSD, and eventually, they were the victims of a senseless murder. We'll dive deep into this case after a quick word from our sponsors. The 1982 murders at Corpsewood Manor. Somerville, Georgia, home to more than 4,000 residents, Chattooga County is located near the Chattooga River and is about a 2-hour drive from the state's capital, Atlanta. Charles Scudder and his longtime partner Joseph Odom will soon construct the Corpsewood Manor on a 40-acre plot of land. But the story starts much earlier than that. On October 6, 1926, Charles Scudder was born in Wauwatosa, Wisconsin. He attended Oberlin College in Oberlin, Ohio. There, he met Helen Kilbourne Hazlett in college, and the two were soon married on September 10, 1946. But they divorced soon after. Charles remarried Boratai Bunting, the daughter of British modernist poet Basil Bunting, a few years later in the 1950s. The couple had 4 sons and ended up getting a divorce. Charles Scudden went to Chicago's Loyola University. He became an associate professor for Dr. Alexander Karchmar, a neuroscientist specializing in the pharmacology department. Dr. Alex described Charles as being out of the ordinary. He had a pet monkey and frequently dyed his hair various colors, such as purple. Charles had a love for playing the harp and was invited to play with the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. As owner of the 1904 mansion on West Adams Street in Chicago, Charles Scudder furnished the palatial estate with Baroque furniture he purchased from the Chicago Theater. Charles hires a man named Joseph Odom, also known as Joey or Joe, in 1959 to help with the care of his 4 children. Joseph Odom was 12 years younger than Charles. Joey dropped out of school in the 5th grade, and he was known for his culinary skills. Joseph moved into the mansion with Charles, his 4 children, and 2 English Mastiff dogs. In 1976, Charles was growing weary of living a routine life. He was tired of working with students, the rush hour traffic, and his neighborhood. He was still mourning the loss of his youngest son, who had died in 1970. Charles and Joseph both valued simplicity in life. They disliked city life's bustle and preferred to live off the grid. Charles Scudder writes about his perspective when he bought the house in A Castle in the Country. He claimed that after having a soul-searching conversation with Joe, they decided they wanted to live somewhere with 4 seasons, no harsh cold winters, a plentiful supply of water, wood for heating and cooking, and their isolation, which was the most important thing of all. In the foothills of the Appalachians, Charles discovered 40 acres of land that was surrounded by national forest. To acquire a sense of the area and take a look around, Charles traveled to Georgia. He said he saw hummingbirds, butterflies, great oaks, bobcats, and the rolling mountain woodland. And as he put it, I was hooked. In 1976, on his 50th birthday, Charles resigned from his job. He then sold his property, gave away all of his electrical appliances, auctioned off all of his furniture and possessions, and hired a moving company to move the things he wanted to keep to Georgia. Charles wrote, "Then Joe and I, plus my 2 English Mastiffs, left for our kingdom." Charles describes the move by saying, "Cutting ties that have taken a lifetime to form is a draining experience, and throwing away professional security and all its supposed conveniences and luxuries is like losing a piece of oneself. But, for me, the change was like crawling out of an old, outworn skin." Charles and Joey departed Chicago in the middle of a blizzard, got lost a few times on the way, and when they finally arrived at their destination, they weren't entirely sure where the property was. They were content with waiting the storm out. After the storm passed, they discovered the corpse of a horse on a logging road and decided to name it Dead Horse Road. Charles and Joey decided to call their new property Corpsewood after taking a look around and noticing the haunting tree. 45,000 bricks, 3 layers thick, with a 2-inch wide airspace between the layers for insulation, were used to build the house. Draining systems and pipes for sinks were installed. On the first floor, they soon had a kitchen, dining room, and a living room. Next year, they got a roof over the 2 upstairs bedrooms and built a 3-story chicken coop. The top floor of the coop was known as the Pink Room, since it was completely pink, and it was where they entertained guests. The first floor of the coop was for poultry and food storage. The second floor was for canned goods and their extensive pornography collection. Building the house took 6 years. Joey loved to cook and had a rose garden. They became friends with the locals, and Charles used the fruit that his neighbors gave him to make wine. Charles loved art. Using stained glass and paintings, he would decorate the house with satanic artifacts. He used stained glass to construct a Baphomet sigil, the symbol of the Church of Satan. Pentagrams were painted on the Jeep's doors. Charles claimed to be an atheist who had the same belief system as Anton LaVey, the founder of the Church of Satan and the religion LaVeyan Satanism. Many people believe Charles was foretelling his own demise when he painted a self-portrait in which he had 5 bullet holes in his head with duct tape over his mouth. Many visitors frequently got permission to hunt on their property, and many of them enjoyed the couple's hospitality. And of course, Charles's homemade wine. Kenneth Avery Brock was one of the hunters who felt Charles and Joey were extremely wealthy, when in fact, Charles claimed, "We live in a grand style on little over $200 a month, about $720 when adjusted for inflation." In late 1982, Kenneth Brock moved into a trailer owned by Samuel West. Kenneth then told Tony about the wealthy, queer devil worshippers. They made a plan to rob the couple. On the night of December 12, 1982, Kenneth and Tony drove to Corpsewood Manor with a .22 Remington rifle obtained from Kenneth's mother and made up a lie about going rabbit hunting. They picked up Joey Wells, Tony's nephew, and his date, Teresa Hudgens. They inhaled alcohol, paint thinner, and glue known as a Toodaloo. When they arrived, Charles took them to the Pink Room, where he gave them some of his homemade wine, while Joey was cleaning up the place. Kenneth then supposedly went to sniff more Toodaloo, but in reality, he went to get the rifle. Charles was drinking when Kenneth returned. When Charles saw the gun, he didn't take it seriously because he was drunk and said, "Bang, bang." He was then held at knife point and ordered to hand over his money. Teresa and Joey rushed to the car to try and start it, but it wouldn't. Kenneth entered the kitchen, shooting 4 times and killing Joey Odom. In addition, he killed the 2 English Mastiff dogs. Charles was taken into the house while being bound and gagged, and there he saw his dead partner. Kenneth then took Charles to the library, placed him in a chair, and removed the gag from his mouth. The final words of Charles Scudder were, "I asked for this." Then, Tony West fired a close-range shot at Charlie's head. He was then shot once again, sending his body toppling into the bookcase, and was then shot 3 more times, also in the head, much like the self-portrait he had created. They raided the residence for cash after the murders. They tried to lift Charles's gold-encrusted harp, but they couldn't because it was misleadingly heavy. In Charles's black Jeep, they left with coins, jewelry, silver candelabras, and a gold-plated dagger. 2 days later, the bodies of Charles and Joey were found when their friend Raymond Williams visited the house to let them know that a friend had passed away. When Raymond saw the bullet holes in the kitchen door, he made the decision to call the police instead of entering the house. That same day, Teresa came forward to the police, and a manhunt began. Tony and Kenneth abandoned the black Jeep in favor of a less noticeable vehicle. They stopped in Boniva, Mississippi, where they kidnapped Navy Lieutenant Kirby Phelps, tied him to a tree, and stole his car while they were at a rest stop. Kirby Phelps was shot twice and killed by Tony West. They traveled to Austin, Texas, where they got into an argument over their strategy and parted ways. On December 20th, Kenneth Brock turned himself in Marietta, Georgia, and on Christmas Day, Tony West was taken into custody in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Police discovered 2 human skulls, 3 vials that were allegedly filled with LSD, occult tools, an occult library, and a large collection of homosexual pornography. The Chattanooga County Sheriff's Office called Charles Scudder and Joey Odom devil worshippers. Due to the First Amendment, Sheriff Gary McConnell was unable to file charges against Charles Scudder and Joey Odom because of their behavior and beliefs. While the name Satanism may be quite misleading, modern practitioners do not worship or believe in the devil, as understood in Christian mythology. When the trial started and the story was covered by the media, Charles and Joey were referred to as homosexual devil worshippers. The satanic panic, which was extremely prevalent in the 1980s and 1990s, turned them into targets. The term satanic panic was used to characterize a belief that devil worshippers were abusing people through rituals all over the United States of America. The defense accused Charles Scudder of spiking his homemade wine with LSD so he could have oral sex with Kenneth and Tony. The wine was tested for LSD and other hallucinogens, but the results were negative. The defense then tried a different angle, claiming that Tony West was involuntarily intoxicated and that Charles was motivated to do so because he was a homosexual. According to the prosecution, Tony West admitted to a Georgia Bureau of Investigation agent that he and Kenneth Brock had planned the murder and robbery a few days before. West also told the GBI agent that he wanted to murder Charles because Charles wanted to have oral sex with him. Tony West said, "All I can say is they were devils and I killed them. That's how I feel about it." They got in contact with Dr. Alex, the professor at Loyola University, who worked with Charles. He claimed that Charles did not use drugs of any kind. He wasn't a devil worshipper, and he would disapprove of drugs rather than use them. Many others felt that because of Charles and Joey's beliefs on certain things, their murders were justified. However, everyone, regardless of moral or religious leanings, was outraged over the murder of Navy Lieutenant Kirby Phelps. After pleading guilty, Kenneth Brock was given 3 consecutive life sentences. Due to an error in the jury's gender makeup, the number they had on the jury for women was wrong. In that trial, Tony was originally sentenced to death, but because of the miscount, he was given a second trial, where he was found guilty of double murder and sentenced to life in prison. Kenneth Brock is serving his sentence at the Coffee Correctional Facility in Nichols, Georgia. At the Wilcox State Prison in Wilcox County, Georgia, Tony West is serving his life sentence. Joey Odom's ashes were scattered in the rose garden he cherished so much during a private funeral at Corpsewood Manor. Charles Scudder's ashes were transported by his sister to Wisconsin, where they buried him in the family plot. Charles's sons hired renowned defense lawyer Bobby Lee Cook, a native of Summerville, Georgia, to represent their claim to the estate. Joey's sister claimed the estate because, in Charles's will, he left everything to Joey. Bobby Lee Cook took possession of the gold-encrusted harp that Kenneth and Tony didn't take the night of the murders due to its heft. Bobby Lee Cook also has the statue of Mephistopheles. Bobby Lee Cook passed away in 2021 at the age of 94, after being a defense attorney for 65 years. According to many stories, Andy Griffith's character of a Georgia lawyer in the TV show Matlock is inspired by the defense attorney Bobby Lee Cook. The chicken coop and Corpsewood Manor were destroyed in a fire January 5, 1983. Still today, a small part of the manor is standing. Many people who hear about this story and go to the location report feeling an eerie sadness and hearing gunshots, dogs barking, and Charles's dog Beelzebub's luminous eyes in the dark. People who took things from the house said they felt like they were being watched and had bad luck, believing the objects were cursed in some way. That is the story of the 1982 murders of Charles Scudder and Joseph Odom at their home, Corpsewood Manor. 2 men packed up and sold most of their life to live in isolation and were then later killed because someone believed they had money, and who, following their deaths, were belittled in the media for their beliefs and their sexual orientation. Many individuals believe the killings were justified due to their unusual beliefs, while others believe it was just a botched robbery, and still yet others believe it was a hate crime. The Satanic Panic is an era in American history that definitely makes me clench my fists when I read about it. If you're not familiar with that time of mass hysteria and hate in American culture, I recommend reading it while you're having a good day, because it will make you angry and sad. The true sadness in this story to me is the fact that Joey and Charles were often judged by a misunderstanding of the way they lived their lives, and inevitably that was what caused their deaths. Not necessarily because people believed they were Satan worshippers, but because they believed they were loaded with tons of cash and jewelry worth taking, even if it meant ending human lives. I hope this story has given you some interesting things to think about, because it definitely has for me. If you love what we're doing here at Weekly Spooky and Terrifying and True, please consider leaving a star review on your favorite podcasting app, like Spotify or Apple Podcasts. It really helps bring in new listeners. And if you are a new listener, welcome. It's now October. It's spooky season, and we're here for you. And a big thank you to Crystal Holder for sending us an email and bringing this one to our attention. We'll be back Wednesday with a less true terrifying tale, and next Monday with yet another piece that is terrifying and true. All my best, my dear listeners. Terrifying and True is narrated by Henrik Kuto and executive produced by Rob Fields and produced by Dan Wilder. Original music by Ray Mattis. All other music by Audioblocks. A big thank you to our Patreon podcast boosters Christopher Sullivan, Brent McCullough, Gino Lyons, Steve King, Karen Wiemet, Jack Kerr, Jeff and George Hilton, Craig Cohen, and Kevin Fry. If you want to find out how you can help the show by joining our Patreon and getting exclusive content, go to weeklyspooky.com and click on Patreon. If you have a story you'd like us to look into here at Terrifying and True, send us an email at weeklyspooky@gmail.com. This program is copyright 2022, Henrik Kuta.